Welcome back. It was a local story that made headlines around the nation. A serial killer on the loose just up the road in Tampa. In all, 4 people were gunned down in the Seminole Heights neighborhood of Tampa. The alleged killer, 24-year-old Howell Donaldson, was caught when he asked his boss at an Ybor City McDonald's to hold a bag containing his gun while he went out to cash a paycheck. The killer struck terror and fear among residents. The Suncoast has had brushes with other serial killers, and that is our subject tonight. And joining us for more is private investigator Bill Warner, clinical psychologist Eddie Rainier, and joining us by Skype is Professor William Kemper, a criminology professor at USF Sarasota Manatee, who spent 25 years as a Detroit police detective and lectures on the subject of serial killers. And Professor, let me start with you. It seemed vexing to local police up there for so many weeks. You know, as things go, it seemed like that this young man, if he is in fact guilty, went about this. He was very, very smart, wasn't he?
Yes, and unfortunately, he does fit the bill of a serial killer. What we call a serial killer is somebody who's murdered at least 3 occasions with a so-called emotional cooling off period between each incident. And as I heard, I think right, it was 51 days, so it is a cooling off period. So he does fall into what we call a class of a serial killer. We do have mass and spree killers, but the serial killer had 3 occasions with a so-called emotional cooling off period.
Bill, what made this so difficult for police to catch him?
Most likely because he was on foot all the time. There was no car on any of the surveillance photos or video for the police to work with. They had no car to pin to Howell Donaldson. He, got into the area, and he had a really noticeable red Mustang with big black racing stripes on it. Obviously, he hid the car somewhere in the neighborhood while he went out on foot to stalk and kill 4 innocent people with no connection to him whatsoever.
So, Doctor, this is the million-dollar question. For somebody who was so smart and so calculating to go about this to avoid capture for 51 days, it seems rather stupid that you hand over the gun in a bag to your boss.
Well, I don't think it was stupid at all. I think it was calculated. I think he got tired of killing. He wanted to be caught. And so he told someone to hold this bag. I have something in it I don't want you to see. That's like putting a neon sign on a bag that says, look inside. He wanted to be caught. He wanted to stop this behavior.
Is there precedence for a serial killer giving themselves up like that?
Well, I'm not a serial killer expert, so I don't know, but I'm a psychologist, and I know that no behavior is accidental. It's all purposeful. The reason he gave his bag before he cashed his check was to be caught.
Professor, I'll ask you the same question. Since you lecture on this, does this happen sometime in this particular way?
It is kind of unusual. Most serial killers, they'll go months, years between killings in their cooling off period, and most of them want to get caught, and they, like in the case of the BTK killer, Dennis Rader, he taunted the police by giving newspaper articles to a newscaster that put him out. So in a way, they want to get caught because he taunted the police department. But in Rader's case, he was just an everyday citizen. He was the president of his church, a good citizen. He was a ordnance officer, animal control, which gave him easy access to people. But again, he wanted to get caught by taunting the police and talking to the newspaper.
And Bill, we only have a couple of seconds left here, but here you have a kid who was a great college basketball player at St. John's in New York, got his degree, came from a great family, and had so much going for him.
Absolutely. It makes no sense whatsoever. He had no prior arrest. He didn't have a childhood where he tortured the neighborhood animals. He wasn't the serial killer in the making. All of a sudden, beginning of October, he starts shooting people at random. It makes no sense.
All right, we are just getting warmed up, and we know where we're going to pick it up. We'll be back on more. We'll have more on serial killers right after we check the First Alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. Tonight we are talking about the arrest of the alleged Seminole Heights killer in Tampa and how law enforcement goes about tracking down and catching them. Joining us for more is private investigator Bill Warner, clinical psychologist Eddie Rainier, and by Skype, Professor William Kemper, a criminology professor at USF Sarasota Manatee who spent 25 years as a Detroit police detective, and lectures on the subject of serial killers. And Professor, you watched the investigation over that course of 51 days, and you saw the frustration in terms of the police and the mayor up there. When that was happening, what questions were you asking yourself?
Well, let me, and the good doctor can help us out on this. Let me give you a couple case files. You got Dennis Rader, you got John Wayne Casey, were model citizens. In Casey's case, he was a clown. Went to parties. He had his picture taken with First Lady, President, Vice President, First Lady, and he was very active in community affairs. Dennis Rader, was active in his community, president of his church. Both these people had good backgrounds. But there are what we call, and this would be up to the doctor to explain, the American Psychiatric Association outlines 7 areas of antisocial personality disorder, which some serial murders have. Maybe the good doctor explain a little bit about disorder. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, so I'm not accusing, but maybe the doctor can explain about the disorder.
Number one, doctor, it's unusual that you have a serial killer, and again, we have to remind everybody he has not been convicted of anything yet, but 23, 24 years old. Some of the people that we have talked about in our history, John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy, they were considerably older than that.
That's right. Well, serial killers mostly have something in common, that they have a lack of empathy and inability to attach, to have meaning about life. And frequently they begin their careers very, very young in life, hurting animals and torturing animals. And often the fundamental thing among them is that they have a mental disorder. And that mental disorder goes unnoticed. Another thing that they seem to have is that they have a history of abuse. Sometimes serious abuse from a family. Sometimes they've been humiliated emotionally. They've been hurt physically. So trauma, abuse, mental disorder, and this inability to form attachments.
Well, it's early on. We don't know if any of this took place yet. All we know about this young man is that he was obviously a talented athlete who just graduated within the last year or so, right. Came back home, and his friends, Bill, say something seemed to change within him in the last 9-10 months.
Yeah, I heard that from his colleagues, different reports that he became more aggressive. They were playing basketball, he became more responsive to a hit or a punch. He wasn't the same person he was, say, 3 years ago. What I see here, though, with Howell Donaldson is he appears to follow the Zodiac killer's playbook. He targeted random people. He didn't rob them. There was no sexual connotation. The victims were young and old, white and black, all different ages, and yet he just came up behind them in most cases, shot them, and ran away. This is kind of like what you'd call a thrill killer, a guy who doesn't really have a purpose or a victim ideology. He's just anybody in his path.
Professor, let me ask you that. How unusual is that? I mean, we've all seen the movies, about different serial killers. Lord knows, just last night my wife and I were watching Hangman, who was a movie with Al Pacino about a fictitious serial killer, and it seems to be that there is a method to their madness. On the other hand, are some cases like this different?
Yeah, let's look at the Washington, D.C. case on the sniper that was just sniping people at gas stations and that was a fairly young man. And they were shooting out of the back of the trunk of a car just at random. I can't recall, they killed 4 or 5 people. But here again, there's a young person, I think that man was in his 20s, that was just randomly picking off people in D.C., as you recall that.
Doctor, people we try to understand these things, and we try to look for answers, and we try to ask ourselves, is this a fault of our mental health system? Is it a fault of our criminal justice system? I think that we probably really don't realize in some cases the war that's going on within people's heads at some point. Is there anything to be learned here in terms of how, as parents, friends, co-workers, that we need to look for things that, you know, a lot of us don't even bother looking for?
Well, I think what you said a great deal. First of all, we have a mental health system in Florida that's dismantled. Secondarily, we know that people with mental disorder, if they don't get early intervention, often manifest their worst form of their mental disorder in their young adulthood years. It is the end of the teens and the early adulthood here that a breakdown occurs. In this particular case, it sounds like this person may have been struggling with mental disorder, and then some event happened. I don't think that it's so random. I think he picked a community that he was angry at, and he wanted to hurt that community. He wanted to get back at it. All the crimes was in a very small circle. It is possible that as his mental disorder became more manifest, that he had troubles fitting in, and he got angry at the community.
You know, we should point out, as you just did, that Florida ranks dead last in the United States in terms of spending on mental health issues. Bill and Professor Kemper, I want to ask you this. You know, obviously, there's a lot of evidence that have come up in this case after the fact.
Right.
But can you both describe the difficulty of police in terms of putting these cases together as quickly as we would like to see them do when a community is in crisis like we just saw in Tampa?
Well, during the crime spree, it was almost impossible to catch him. He was like a ghost, and he targeted the same area, sometimes within the same 2 blocks, and he kept going back. It was like he was toying with the police, like, you know, catch me if you can, but I'm coming back and I'm gonna kill somebody else. Very off the wall.
Professor Kemper, let me ask you the same question. Is this often the case that when you have serial killers out there, that it is in real time, when the pressure is on, it's very difficult for even the best investigators to come up with these answers?
Yes, and that's what we call a comfort zone. They start out where they feel comfortable within the jurisdiction of where they live, and then they branch out to different jurisdictions. So that's what we call a transparency. In other words, the police are looking right through him. If they were to interview him, basketball player, graduate, the same as Gacy and Radar, you're looking right through him. So you could have interviewed this young man and never thought the worst of him because of his background. But he fell in that comfort zone, is what we call, and he's what we call a transparency. In other words, you're looking right through him.
Professor, I want to ask you one more question. We're coming up on a break, less than a minute left. How often do people do these kinds of murders and then move on out of the area, and local police are left without answers and they wind up relocating to someplace else?
Well, being a police officer, I certainly won't put the blame on other police departments. But a lot of times we have a lack of communications. They could do a serial murder in one town, move to another town and do a serial murder. And a lot of times police don't communicate on these as being the same. That's where the FBI profiling comes in to help. Is communication is the key to within police departments. And again, I'm not bad-mouthing because I was one, but a lot of times when they'll move out of the comfort zone, they feel free and they go to some other place and commit another murder. All right, we have hard to time to get it sometimes.
All right, we have to take a quick break and we'll come back for final thoughts in a moment. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And Professor, I'm going to start with you because you're a former police officer yourself. I want you to talk about how Tampa police and state and federal authorities handled this case. Do you think that they did the best job they possibly could?
Yes, I do, because here's a young man, and I'll sum it up. He was in his comfort zone. Police done their job, knocking on doors, going through there. He was in his comfort zone, which means he was comfortable. He worked at the McDonald's. And as a transparency, they're looking right through this young man because of his background. Police can do their job. They were doing their job. And yeah, I feel they've done an excellent job in catching him and the amount of manpower they put in it. But again, if self-confidence and obsession with his own power grows, if they didn't catch him, he could have included that radius. and made arrests more difficult.
Doctor, let me ask you this. Many of us will remember during the middle of this, Tampa's mayor had a press conference and he told police, I want you to bring back his head on a platter to me. Was that helpful?
No, I don't think so. Now, I don't want to blame the mayor because he didn't do anything. However, you don't want to egg on a crazy person who's operating under their own logic. You want to remain quiet and let the police do their work. And he had excellent policemen doing their work. He could have remained quiet.
And Bill, after the fact, you know, look, the manager at the McDonald's got the bag with the gun inside. The munition was linked up very quickly. But after the fact, what are other things kind of added up?
Oh, the big thing was his cell phone. Once they had his cell phone, they got his cell phone records on the site charges, and they knew he was up on this 1300 block of East Firestone Ave, right in the middle of where all the murders took place. He was there on the October 9th, on the 11th, and on the 19th. He kept going back to the same street, it looks like, to park his car, and then go out and commit the murders.
Absolutely incredible. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank
Fascinating conversation. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about Friday night's show on The Week in Washington. President Trump retweeted videos some view as racist, causing backlash from the UK. One of the videos allegedly shows a Muslim migrant beating up a Dutch boy who is on crutches. The second video allegedly shows a Muslim destroying a statue of the Virgin Mary. We went to Facebook to hear what some of you had to say. And Kevin says, the king of calling others fake news retweets videos that are probably fake, and then his spokeswoman says it's okay because they point out a real problem, even if they are fake. And Mark says, what is racist about the retweet when has a religion become a race? Every time the news media think that they have him, he comes out ahead. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Amazon Fire and Roku. And for the latest on local and breaking news, don't forget to download our new updated version of the app. It is, if your current app doesn't work, that's because it is expired. So just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Private investigator Bill Warner, clinical psychologist Eddie Renier, and by Skype, Professor William Kemper, a criminology professor at USF Sarasota and Manatee and a former Detroit police officer.